Talk Ava. Learn English with confidence.
Today, we are looking at something very simple, but it changes how you sound in English more than you might expect. We are going to explore the difference between maybe and perhaps, and how to use them naturally in real conversations.
These two words often seem similar, and many learners think they can use them in the same way.
I used to think that as well. For a long time, I treated them as equal, just two different ways to say the same thing.
What made you question that idea?
It happened during a simple conversation. I said, "Maybe I'll join later," and it sounded normal. Then someone else said, "Perhaps I'll join later," and the sentence felt different, even though the meaning was almost the same.
Different in what way?
The second sentence sounded more careful, almost more thoughtful. It did not feel casual in the same way.
So, both sentences are correct, but they create a different impression.
Yes, and that is what made me pause. If the meaning is the same, why does the feeling change?
That question is important because in real conversations, how something sounds can matter as much as what it means.
Exactly. And I realized that I was choosing words based only on meaning, not on how they affect tone.
That is a common pattern for learners. They focus on correctness, but not always on how the sentence feels to the listener.
Yes, and that's why this topic matters. It's not about learning new vocabulary, it's about using familiar words in a more natural way.
If you're new here, welcome to Talk Ava. We practice real English through natural conversations, so you can use it confidently in daily life.
And since the channel is new, your support makes a difference. You can like this video, share it with someone learning English, and subscribe so you don't miss future lessons.
Now, let's stay with that same example because it shows the problem clearly.
When I say, "Maybe I'll join later," it sounds relaxed. It feels like I am speaking quickly and casually.
It also feels like you're not thinking too deeply about the decision.
Yes, but when I hear, "Perhaps I'll join later," it sounds more careful, like the person is considering the situation more seriously.
That small change creates a different impression, even though the message is almost identical.
Exactly, and that is what made me realize that these words are not just about meaning, they also carry a certain tone.
That means choosing between maybe and perhaps is not random.
Yes, and I started wondering how often this difference appears in everyday conversations.
Once you notice it, you start hearing it more often.
That is what happened. I began to notice these words in different situations, and each time the choice felt intentional.
That suggests there is a pattern behind it.
Yes, and understanding that pattern can help you sound more natural when you speak. And once you see those patterns, it becomes easier to choose the right word without thinking too much.
That is where your speaking starts to feel more natural and more confident.
After that moment, I started paying closer attention to how people use maybe and perhaps in different situations, and I realized the difference becomes clearer when the context changes.
What kind of situations did you notice first?
I noticed it in casual conversations. For example, someone said, "Maybe we can meet tomorrow," and it sounded natural and relaxed.
That fits the situation because casual conversations usually use simple and direct language.
Yes, and then in a more serious discussion, I heard someone say, "Perhaps we should review this again," and the tone felt different.
That sounds more careful and slightly more formal.
Exactly, and both sentences were about a suggestion, but the feeling was not the same.
So the choice of word changes how the suggestion is received.
Yes, and I noticed another situation at work. Someone said, "Maybe this approach will work," and it sounded like a quick idea.
It feels like the person is thinking out loud.
Yes, but another person said, "Perhaps this approach will work," and it sounded more considered.
That version feels like the person has thought about it more carefully before speaking.
Exactly. And that made me realize something important. These words do not just show possibility, they also show how you are thinking.
That means they reflect your attitude, not just your meaning.
Yes, and that is where learners often get confused. They focus on the meaning, which is similar, but they ignore the tone.
That is why they use both words in the same way without noticing the difference.
Exactly. And I recognized that I was doing the same thing. I would choose one of them without thinking about how it sounds.
That usually happens because learners learn these words as synonyms.
Yes, and when you learn something as a synonym, you assume the difference is not important.
But in real conversations, small differences in tone can change how your message is understood.
Yes, and there is another reason why this confusion happens. Many learners try to translate directly from their own language.
And in some languages, there may not be a clear difference between these two words.
Exactly. So they use whichever word comes to mind without adjusting for tone.
That creates sentences that are correct, but slightly unnatural in certain situations.
Yes, and I noticed that when I used perhaps in very casual situations, it sounded a bit out of place.
It can sound too careful or too formal in a relaxed conversation.
Exactly. And when I used maybe in a more serious context, it sometimes sounded less thoughtful than I intended.
That shows that both words are correct, but they are not always appropriate in every situation.
Yes, and that is where the real learning begins. Not just knowing the words, but knowing when to use each one.
When you don't understand, you can think like this. Maybe sounds more casual and quick, while perhaps sounds more careful and considered.
That simple idea helped me a lot because it gave me a starting point.
And from there, you can start noticing how these words are used in real conversations.
Yes, and once I started paying attention, I realized that the difference appears in many types of situations.
Not just suggestions, but also opinions and responses.
Exactly. And that made it clear that this is not a small detail. It is part of how natural English works.
In the next part, we will focus more closely on how maybe is used in everyday conversations, so you can see the pattern clearly.
And that will help you use it more naturally without thinking too much about rules. That is where your speaking starts to feel more relaxed and natural.
As I continued paying attention, I started focusing on how maybe is used in real conversations, and I noticed a clear pattern.
What stood out to you about maybe?
It appears very often in quick, everyday speech. People use it when they're thinking in the moment or speaking casually.
So it feels natural in relaxed situations.
Yes. For example, someone might say, "Maybe I'll call you later," and it sounds simple and natural.
That sentence feels like a quick decision, not something deeply considered.
Exactly. And I noticed that maybe is often used when the speaker is not trying to sound formal or careful.
It matches a casual tone.
Yes, another example is, maybe we can try this, which sounds like a suggestion made during conversation.
That feels open and flexible.
I also noticed that maybe is often used at the beginning of a sentence.
That placement makes it easy to express uncertainty quickly.
Yes, for example, maybe it will rain today, or maybe he is busy.
When you don't understand, you can think like this. Maybe is used when you are speaking freely and casually.
That idea helped me because I stopped trying to use it in every situation and focused on when it feels natural.
Now let's look at perhaps, because this is where the difference becomes clearer.
Yes, when I listen to how people use perhaps, I notice that it appears less often and usually in more careful or thoughtful speech.
It sounds more deliberate.
Exactly. For example, someone might say, "Perhaps we should consider another option." And it sounds more measured.
That sentence feels like the speaker is thinking before speaking.
Yes, and it gives the impression that the idea has been considered more carefully.
That is different from maybe, which often feels immediate.
Exactly. And I noticed that perhaps is also used when someone wants to sound more polite or less direct.
For example, perhaps you could try this method.
Yes, and that sounds softer and more respectful.
That shows how word choice can change the tone of your message.
I also noticed that perhaps can appear in similar positions as maybe, but the feeling is different.
For example, perhaps it will rain today.
Yes, and that sentence sounds more careful than maybe it will rain today.
So even in the same structure, the tone changes.
Exactly. And that is what made the difference clear to me. It's not just about where the word is placed, but how it feels.
Another important point is frequency. Maybe is used much more often in everyday speech.
Yes, and perhaps appears less often, which makes it stand out when it is used.
That means using perhaps too often can make your speech sound unnatural.
Exactly. And I noticed that when I tried to use perhaps in every sentence, it did not feel natural anymore.
So, balance is important.
Yes, and I also realized that both words are correct, but they are used in different situations.
That is why understanding tone is important.
When you don't understand, you can remember it like this. Maybe is for casual and quick speech, and perhaps is for careful and thoughtful speech.
That simple idea helps guide your choice.
Yes, and once I started thinking in this way, it became easier to decide which word to use.
That will help you understand how small changes can affect how your message is received.
And that is where your speaking becomes more natural and more precise.
At this point, I wanted to understand the difference more clearly, so I started comparing maybe and perhaps in the same sentences.
That is a useful approach because it shows how the tone changes without changing the meaning too much.
Yes, for example, if I say, maybe this will work, it sounds like I'm sharing a quick idea.
That feels natural in a casual discussion.
Now if I say, perhaps this will work, the meaning is similar, but the tone changes.
That version sounds more careful, like you're considering the possibility more seriously.
Exactly. And I noticed that the listener might respond differently depending on which word I use.
Because the tone gives a signal about how certain or thoughtful you are.
Yes. Another example is, maybe we should try a different method.
That sounds like a suggestion made during conversation.
But if I say, perhaps we should try a different method, it feels more structured.
That version sounds like you have reflected on the situation before speaking.
Yes, and I realized that even though both sentences suggest the same action, they create different impressions.
That shows how word choice affects communication, beyond meaning.
I also compared responses. For example, maybe he's busy sounds like a quick guess.
That fits a casual situation.
But perhaps he is busy sounds more careful, like you're trying to be thoughtful.
That can make your response feel more polite.
Yes, and that is something I didn't notice before. The word you choose can change how polite or thoughtful your sentence sounds.
That is why native speakers choose these words based on context, not randomly.
Another comparison I tried was with questions. For example, maybe we can meet later.
That sounds like an informal suggestion.
Another comparison I tried was with questions. For example, maybe we can meet later?
That sounds like an informal suggestion.
And perhaps we can meet later sounds more formal or careful.
That version might be used in a more serious or polite setting.
Yes, and once I started comparing them like this, the difference became easier to understand.
Because you are not memorizing rules, you are feeling the tone.
Exactly, and that made it easier to choose the right word in different situations.
When you don't understand, you can think like this. If the situation is relaxed, maybe usually fits better.
And if the situation is more careful or thoughtful, perhaps may be a better choice.
That simple idea helps guide your decision.
I also noticed that using the wrong tone does not make your sentence incorrect, but it can make it feel slightly out of place.
That is an important point. Both words are correct, but not always suitable.
Yes, and understanding that helps you sound more natural. That will help you use both maybe and perhaps with more confidence.
And that is where your control over these words becomes stronger.
After comparing maybe and perhaps in different situations, I started noticing some common mistakes that learners make when they try to use these words.
That is useful because recognizing mistakes helps you avoid them more easily.
One of the first mistakes I noticed is overusing perhaps. Some learners try to sound more advanced, so they replace maybe with perhaps in almost every sentence.
That can make their speech sound unnatural, especially in casual conversations.
Yes, for example, saying perhaps I will call you later in a relaxed conversation can sound too careful.
In that situation, maybe I will call you later would feel more natural.
Exactly, and this shows that using more complex words does not always improve your English. Sometimes it makes it less natural.
That is an important lesson. Natural English is about choosing the right word for the situation, not the most advanced word.
Another mistake I noticed is avoiding perhaps completely. Some learners only use maybe because it feels easier.
That limits their ability to express different tones.
Yes, because sometimes you want to sound more thoughtful or careful, and perhaps helps with that.
So both words are useful, but they should be used in the right context.
Exactly, and balance is important. You do not need to use perhaps often, but you should not ignore it completely.
Another mistake is using both words together, like maybe, perhaps, which is unnecessary.
Yes, I heard someone say that, and it sounded repetitive.
That happens when learners are unsure and try to combine words to be safe.
But in this case, one word is enough. You choose either maybe or perhaps, depending on the tone.
That keeps your sentence clear.
Another issue I noticed is using perhaps in very fast, casual speech. It does not match the rhythm of the conversation.
That can make your speech feel slightly disconnected from the situation.
Yes, because perhaps naturally slows the sentence, it makes it feel more deliberate.
So using it in a quick, informal conversation can feel out of place.
Exactly. And that is why listening is important. You need to hear how these words are used in real conversations.
That helps you develop a sense of when each word feels natural.
I also notice a subtle mistake related to tone. Sometimes learners use maybe in situations where they want to sound more careful or polite.
Can you give an example?
For example, saying, maybe you should check this again in a serious discussion.
That can sound a bit too casual for that context.
Yes, in that situation, perhaps you should check this again would sound more appropriate.
That small change makes the suggestion feel more respectful.
Exactly. And this is where control becomes important. It's not about knowing the words, but knowing how they affect your message.
Another useful idea is to think about intention. Before choosing the word, you can ask yourself, how do you want to sound?
Yes, for example, do I want to sound relaxed or thoughtful?
If the situation is relaxed, maybe is usually the better choice.
And if the situation requires more care, perhaps may fit better.
When you don't understand, you can think like this. Choose the word based on your intention, not just the meaning.
That helped me a lot, because I stopped choosing words automatically.
And you started choosing them with purpose.
Yes, and that made my speech feel more controlled and more natural at the same time.
That is the goal. Control without overthinking.
I also practiced by repeating simple patterns. For example, maybe we can try this, and perhaps we should try this.
That helps you feel the difference instead of memorizing it. Yes, and once you feel the difference, it becomes easier to use the right word in real conversations.
Another useful habit is to listen to native speakers and notice how often they use each word.
Yes, I noticed that maybe appears much more often in everyday speech.
And perhaps appears less often, but in more specific situations.
That observation helped me understand how to balance them.
Because now you aren't guessing, you're following real patterns.
Exactly, and over time, this becomes automatic. You don't need to stop and think.
That is when your English starts to feel natural.
When I compare my earlier speech to now, I notice a clear difference. Before, I chose words based only on meaning.
And now you consider tone and intention as well.
Yes, and that makes my sentences sound more appropriate for the situation.
That is a big improvement, because communication is not only about being correct.
It's about being understood in the right way.
Exactly, and small words like maybe and perhaps play a big role in that.
So if we bring everything together, the idea is simple. Both words show possibility, but they create different tones.
Maybe feels more casual, quick, and relaxed.
And perhaps feels more careful, thoughtful, and slightly more formal.
Use maybe in everyday conversations when you're speaking naturally.
And use perhaps when you want to sound more considered or polite.
You do not need to force either word, just match it with the situation.
Another important point is practice. Try using both words in simple sentences.
For example, maybe I will go, and perhaps I will go.
Then notice how each sentence feels.
That will help you develop a natural sense of usage.
Over time, you won't think about the rule, you'll just choose the word that feels right.
That is how real fluency develops.
If this conversation helped you understand the difference, you can support the channel by liking the video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to Talk Ava.
Your support helps us create more practical conversations like this and reach more learners.
Keep practicing, keep listening, and focus on small changes like this.
Those small changes will make your English sound more natural, step by step.